some people believe that the whole theory that we are body and soul was given to our culture by Socrates. John Burnet, a fellow of the British Academy, wrote an interesting paper around 1906, I think, 1904. Forget the date on it exactly, but he traces some of the Greek roots of the idea of psyche, of soul, of psyche, as we call it today. And one thing he noted was that prior to Socrates, the psyche, the psyche, was connected mostly with people's unconscious life. The psyche was kind of a life principle, and if you fainted, for instance, you were in danger of losing your soul, and if it wasn't brought back, you might die, and death was seen as the permanent separation of the body and the soul. And even in sneezing, you maybe could lose your psyche, and to this day, there are these little remarks that are made in different cultures. I know in German culture, people say Gesundheit, which is like it's an invocation of a blessing. Gesund, well, healthy. May you have health. And when somebody sneezes, that is often uttered, and it might be a way of either dispelling a curse or bringing a blessing on you so that your spirit would not be permanently lost from your body, and so that you would go on living. And English people say God bless you, that's very common, and has the same kind of roots, evidently, in people's thinking in antiquity. Prior to Socrates, the soul is connected with swooning, that is fainting, with perhaps sneezing. It's also connected with dream life. And there you have this very ancient idea that when you dream, there is a part of you that somehow leaves the body. It might not have to physically leave the body, but it somehow is a receiver of perceptions. And as a receiver of perceptions, it is perceiving things some distance away, any amount of distance away. The soul has religious connotations. It is a way of encountering or being in touch with God. And that isn't a bodily thing, but something else. You do meet people that believe that they have met God while they were asleep in a dream. In a very significant dream. Not a run-of-the-mill dream, but a very significant dream. I did some research into visions of Christ and located people that believed they had encountered him face-to-face, 30 people I interviewed. And one of them had had a dream. She'd had maybe 5 or 6 encounters with Christ face-to-face, she believes. But she had a dream in which she met God, and that was quite different. And she didn't really want to call it a dream. It took place while she was asleep. And yet somehow her soul, her spirit, her mind, her self, her consciousness, her real me, what do we call this? See, we're at an end here as far as language is concerned. But her real person, her real self had met God, and it didn't involve the body. In fact, she thought that she had left her body and gone to another place. That seems a little unusual, to me anyway, to think that after a dream, you've actually gone to a different place. I've also met people that said they astral traveled, and as they could somehow leave their bodies and see things and see places and so on. This is also part of that old tradition. I remember interviewing a lady in a woman in Indiana or Illinois, I forget which. And she claims, you see, that she left her body and she went to Washington, D.C. And she saw the Lee Memorial, she saw the Capitol building, some familiar landmarks. I've been to Washington, so I talked a little bit about the landmarks. And had she seen these? Then I put the following question to her. I said, as I drove up your driveway today to conduct this interview, I just noticed that there were 2 basketball hoops. And her husband was a professor. They had a couple of sons, teenage or early 20s, whatever the age, I forget now. And they had quite a large driveway, and they had 2 basketball hoops. So I guess they could have a bit of a team. And anyway, they were at right angles to one another. They kind of caught my attention because you don't see many places with 2 basketball hoops. It's a nice country home. And so I said to her, can you tell me that you had a memory of seeing your house and these basketball hoops from the top? She says, oh yes. She says, when I came back to my home, I descended from above the house and saw these things clearly. Now, I mean, that's interesting that a person would have a memory of seeing something from above that would normally be accessible, say, only by helicopter. And we did the interview in kind of the, I think the family room, and there was an open beam ceiling, usual cedar or pine, and a fan. She talks about being caught between 2 expanses of wood, one of which was moving, and the other of which was stationary. And she said she was caught. It took her quite some time to realize that she was near the ceiling, maybe 8 or 9 feet from the floor. Anyway, those kinds of astral travel experiences we associate with waking life, not so much with dreaming. But in dreaming, people are said to have encountered God. And it's their soul, their consciousness. It's not the body. The body is quite irrelevant. Anyway, prior to Socrates, the soul is connected with religious life, with swooning, fainting, perhaps sneezing, other extreme events in which people lose consciousness, lose touch with this body. Some people think it can be brought to regular consciousness through hypnosis. There is a connection with hypnosis and all of this. My brother-in-law has a friend, and they had this strange experience of having objects move in their house. And if I recall correctly, dreams of an Indian man trying to contact them. Anyway, you know how the story is going to go. They're all there in the popular literature. They went for hypnosis, and under hypnosis, they saw the figure that had been appearing in the dreams. And they were able to get a very accurate description. And he was begging them for proper burial. And so he said that he belonged to a certain Native American group, actually a small tribe, it turned out, that he had been murdered and that he had never been given proper burial, and he instructed them on how to do it. This is all under hypnosis. And they were to build a little boat, and the boat would be under to certain specifications, and that would carry his soul away, and they had to perform a certain ritual with all of that. And then the hypnotic session was over, and they started doing research. Actually, it was a husband and wife team, and they both taught. I think it was in the Transcona district in Winnipeg, which is kind of the northeast end of Winnipeg, or east end of Winnipeg. And anyway, it turns out that his apparel was appropriate for the tribe that he said he belonged to, and the burial ritual was also appropriate. And so they conducted this little ritual, and all the dreams stopped, all these strange hauntings that had been featured in their home. This is kind of, I've gone on a little bit longer than I might normally do on this point, but I want to reinforce something with you, and that is, this is the origin of the notion of Suki and psyche and related concepts. There's this blurry thing about where soul stops and spirit begins, if in fact they are different. And it has a religious character to it. Now, Socrates is credited by Burnett in this paper, The Socratic Doctrine of the Soul, it's called, and it's in the Proceedings of the Aristotelian Society. I have further precise details. In fact, I have a copy of the paper. He said that after Socrates, the soul became part of waking life. And when Socrates was once pressed, what do you mean when you talk about soul? He gave this very indirect definition. In fact, it wouldn't normally be recognized as a definition, but it is a kind of definition that philosophers recognize. He says it is that in us by virtue of which we are wise or foolish, good or bad. And he makes the soul there sort of the bearer of conscious life, of mind, of thought, and also of moral choice. So, sort of our cognitive powers and our moral qualities and our moral capacities. Actually, the moral capacities are curious. They're very curious. People often instinctively react from a moral point of view to something. They don't reason out their views. They instinctively react. People react like beyond what reason would be able to explain, to murder, to horrific rape, sexual assault. It's quite fascinating. The Bernardo case is again in the papers because of legal disputes regarding the videos. And it's fascinating to see the depth of passion that people respond with to issues like that. It's not rational entirely. It takes us into the passionate side of our nature. So the moral dimension is somehow connected here by Socrates with soul. And you could say that from Socrates' time on, soul or mind is very much a part of conscious life. Not just dreams, not just odd, irregular religious experiences, not just apparitions, these ghost haunting kinds of phenomena and so on. It's not just that, it's part of everyday life. It becomes the noblest part of our person, and this idea of a life principle, it never disappears. People still sort of think that at death, maybe something leaves. It might be leaves in scare quotes, not really leave. Something else is created at death that is the bearer of identity, perhaps. Maybe that's how it works, if there is immortality or survival. So the soul is a life principle, but as a life principle, it's the sort of thing that's thought not to go out of existence. It just perpetually exists on and on. Very religious idea. Well, the scientific community has really gotten a hold of this whole domain of psyche, of psyche, of spirit, of soul. A great deal of it has more or less banished to the hinterland. You don't talk about those things. You don't talk about them scientifically. You don't investigate apparitions scientifically. Actually, there's a bit of a thaw on that, and there have been movements all through the years. The British Society for Psychical Research did all kinds of interesting work. I think the most interesting work they did was a poll that they conducted in between 1890 and about 96. They asked 17,000 people in Great Britain, ordinary people in Great Britain, if they'd ever had a strange experience that was hallucinatory, whether it was tactile or visual or auditory, and nearly 10% of the British population, these aren't people locked up in hospitals, report. I mean, there's been you've probably heard of the Rhine Institute, Duke University, J.B. Ryan's work there. But a lot of that stuff isn't so much connected with soul. Actually, you get this fascinating change in terminology around the turn of the century, turn of the 20th century. Soul changes to mind, but mind still has a thingish kind of sound to it, and so you substitute mind with consciousness, and consciousness is a property. So you have properties, you have physical properties. You're 110 pounds, 160 pounds, whatever. You're 5'1" or 5'8" or 5'11", whatever. You've got physical properties, and then you've got mental properties. You have consciousness. And there's a terminological move that's taken place, soul to mind to consciousness, and with it, a kind of a refocusing of problems. Certain problems are shelved, discarded, dispensed with, eliminated. They're kind of religious, or they're otherworldly, or they're frightening. Actually, hauntings are frightening for a lot of people. I was having dinner at one of the Oxford colleges in '93, and I sat across from this professor who told me he was an organist in a church as well as being a professor. I think he was somewhere in Wales. And he said he was playing the organ one day, and the door opened up, and an apparition walked in and stood in the vestibule, the lobby of the church. He said he just kept on playing and it disappeared. He wasn't frightened at all. But the common population is probably a little frightened. There are conceptual issues here. What are these concepts that we're using? Can we give them any credibility, any substance? I hate to use the word. Can we make sense of them? So concepts of mind, soul, spirit. These cannot be defined in any simple way. They have to be contextually defined. You find out their meanings by learning to use the words properly, and in learning to use the words properly, you acquire the concepts. And that's not done overnight. That takes years to perfect. The causal relationship of soul to body. People have speculated. They've been wanting to think of soul in rather a kind of a thingish way. Actually, Aristotle was quite sophisticated in his view of soul. He's the one that gave to the West this idea that there are basically three kinds of living thing. There's plant life, there's animal life, and then there's human life. They share something in common. They all take in nutrients and grow, and they give off expel various waste products. So they're all things that absorb and excrete. But animals have a power of movement within themselves. That's what the animal soul is. To be an animal is to be a creature that's capable not just of feeding itself, but of moving itself. Now, there may be plants that do that, but not in the usual sense that we ascribe self-movement to animals. This, incidentally, was so significant for many, many centuries when people only knew about the existence of a growing child through its activity in the mother's womb. And that was the moment, you see, when quickening was when the animal soul actually came to the growing child. So it was first like a vegetable. It was taking in nutrients, but it didn't have the power of movement. Of course, cameras in wombs weren't available until recently to give us a fuller story. So for Aristotle, a person went through 3 souls, as it were, in becoming human. And to become human, I mean, a human for him was an animal, not a plant, but an animal that had rationality, powers of reason. And of course, powers of reason maybe don't exhibit themselves until sometime in the first year. And in the defense of infanticide, abortion and infanticide, some people make a great deal about the fact that there isn't really rationality in a child until it's some months along. And until then, it isn't really human, or it's not fully human, not in some sense that marks our species as unique, but the ensoulment, as far as humanity, comes later. But it's interesting because for Aristotle, the soul isn't so much a thing as it is for Plato. The 3 greatest philosophers are Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, and the first taught the second, and the second the third, as you probably know. And they wrestle with this idea. Aristotle is more modern. Soul is just a form of life. It isn't a thing that's separate from the body, really. But with Socrates and Plato, you still have this separateness. And if you think of them as separate, you wonder how they causally connect. Are they causally related? And that's what this little diagram is all about. It talks about ways that they might be related. Materialists really don't believe in soul. And that's taken a variety of forms in the 20th century. Identity theorists, they say, well, what you call a mental state is really a neurophysiological state. That's all it is. There's nothing over and above that. Functionalism is a little more sophisticated than that. It's actually expecting that global functions like imagining will be found. And it's not so much a one-to-one pairing with mental states, but something a little bit more remote. The eliminativists, like Paul and Patricia Churchland, with whom I once worked in San Diego, they've done a great job in sort of making the case for eliminativism. The idea here is more or less like this. We should just eliminate all talk of spirit, soul, mind. Just stop using the language, and questions about what it is will disappear. We should eliminate it. It doesn't have any credibility, scientific basis, or any other explanatory value. Just scrap it. Scrap it the way phlogiston theory was scrapped around, say, I don't know the date on that, 1800, 1810. Phlogiston used to be considered to be real. Phlogiston was in wood. When you place wood over fire, you heat it up, and heating it up forces the phlogiston out, and all that's left is a bit of ash and water vapor if you can catch it. So actually wood is mostly phlogiston. Well, you see, that theory is gone. It's rubbish. We laugh at it today. It's eliminated. And the Churchland's advice is do the same thing with mind, soul, spirit, such talk. Scrub it from your language. No self-respecting person talks that way. And if you don't talk that way, you won't be worried about a relationship between mind and body. Because you're not talking about mind anymore, just like you don't talk about phlogiston. But the thing is, it's interesting that we can talk about phlogiston, even though it doesn't exist. We have the concept of phlogiston. Anyway, many different ideas put forward here about the relationship. Ordinary people seem to be interactionist. They think that mental states cause physical and physical cause mental. I hit my hand on the edge here and I just felt a bit of pain. Now, the pain presumably occurred in the brain, but I felt it here in my arm, in my hand. Interactionism. Physical events cause mental, mental cause physical. The astral body view is actually an old Christian one. It locates minds in space. Descartes didn't want to locate them in space, but how can they interact with bodies that are in space? Now, that's a problem. And idealists don't believe in matter. There was a famous bishop who said there really isn't any matter. The only things that exist are minds and their ideas. So there isn't really a lectern. This lectern isn't really real. You have an idea of it, though. And how do you get it? Oh, you run your hand over it. You get smooth ideas, smooth sensation. I have brown ones, and black, and silver. What is the lectern? It's a series of ideas. And you can't prove from your ideas that there really is any matter. You don't really have a body the way common sense teaches you that you have. No. You have ideas of a hand, of a ring, that's not part of my body, thumb, etc. So the idealist solves the problem, just like the materialist does, by saying only one exists, only minds, and their ideas exist. If you don't find that palatable, then some other theory presumably is more attractive to you. This is an amusing one. This one doesn't actually believe in any interaction at all. When the alarm clock goes off in the morning, these people actually believe in a material object. Well, here's a stone about to hit the head. But let's take the alarm clock. The alarm clock goes off. It's old-fashioned. You have a little banger and it hits against a metal surface. You've seen those? And what God does is He makes a ringing sound in your head. And you think it comes from the alarm clock, but no, it comes from Him. God is very wise, and He's everywhere. And He's making sure that you hear the right things, feel the right things, smell and taste. Well, I mean, I guess sometimes things get a little mixed up. When you have a cold, you don't taste the way you should, etc., etc. Occasionalists, they don't believe in interaction. The parallelists don't either. They just say that we have two lives. We have two lives. You open a book, your eyes fall on something, but then the ideas have no relation to what you've read. These are all reactions to the interactionist idea. How can mind and body interact? They are so different. One, the Cartesians, the followers of Descartes, they said mind has no weight, it has no mass, it has no location. It's just like an abstract object. How can it interact? I mean, how can a thought make my body move? I'm going to make my body move. Look how easy it is. So a thought has no mass, is not in space, has no dimension, and it makes this body move. How can it do that? These people say it's crazy. Spinoza, mind and body, this is actually a bit like the position I outlined earlier. Mind and body, mental states and physical states are really, they're really of one thing. And we should think of there being only one thing that has both a mental and a physical aspect to it. Now, actually, Spinoza's view committed him to the position that stones also think. That stones have a mental life, because everything has both a physical and a mental side to it. The thing about stones is that they don't tell us very much about what they're thinking about or how it feels to be hurled and land in the middle of the lake, and whether they like being wet or dry. I'm just having a little fun. So, I don't really understand hypophenomenalism. I got this out of Richard Taylor's Metaphysics and I thought it was extremely amusing. And then I read in C.J. Dukas that Schopenhauer had a view according to which there really are minds only, but somehow physical objects are created by an act of the will. Actually, like this epiphenomenalism, I think this is a view that Dr. Philipchak is interested in. And if I recall that from conversations of years ago, we used to talk about epiphenomenalism. And some of the psychologists that you knew about, whose work you knew about, that were inclined to epiphenomenalism. This is like mental events. They really have no part to play in the causal story of the world. They're just kind of like fluff or froth. You don't write a book because you have an idea. You write a book because of physical events. Your mother said something to you. Your teacher scolded you. You ate this, not that. And so you wrote a book. It had nothing to do with ideas. Ideas don't make hands move. Hands move because of whatever it is inside the organism. My arm isn't moving because I make a decision to move it. I have a thought, I want to, that's mental, I want to move it, and so I decide, another mental event. So wants and decisions cause hands to move. No. The epiphenomenalist says, no. Has nothing to do with it. There are mental events, there are thoughts and decisions, but they have no causal power at all. They are nothing. They're just fluff. Well, they're not nothing. They have no causal efficacy. So it's not my decision to walk over here. It's just my conditioning history, my genetic endowment, and the beautiful combination of the two that caused me to move in the direction. Actually, epiphenomenalists are probably a bit, they'd be, I think they would like Skinner's. Are you all psych students? All psych majors? They'd like Skinner's idea about behaviorism. Actually, there was another behavioristic school called the philosophical behaviorists. And they're different than Skinner, though. Skinner just said, I can do all my psychology without ever talking about mental states. But these folks, they said, mental states are identical to behaviors. So what does it mean to have a headache? So you say, I have a headache. For a philosophical behaviorist, that means something like, I grab aspirin and swallow it. I clutch my head and groan. And I utter words like, I have a headache. That's what it means to have a headache. You define mental states with respect to behaviors. Now that was just a blip on the screen. Some people ascribe it to Gilbert Ryle. What was the name of his book? The Concept of Mind. And he tried to more or less eliminate mind as a problem. Anyway, where are we now? Well, I'd say that most psychologists and philosophers are materialists of one kind or another. But in concluding this, let me just say that I'm not sure. I don't know what to think. I'm a dualist. I believe in soul and body most of the time. Well, some of the time, anyway. I believe I will survive the death of my body, although I'm not quite sure what will happen at my death. Sometimes I'm tempted to think that a replica of me gets created then. But I don't know if I really believe that. I consider myself some kind of an Orthodox Christian. And I think that you could be Orthodox Christian and probably maintain almost any of these positions on mind or soul. If you were a creationist or a re-creationist, like I just explained, I guess you could hold any position and think that there is a bearer of identity that is really you. It's a wonderful subject, this topic of soul. It is a cause of bewilderment, and that's often a good place to begin study. If you're not puzzled or bewildered or confused, it doesn't hold much interest.